Do you want to make a Star Wars movie? That seems like a straightforward question, right? Of course. But it's been a hard few years for Lucasfilm and directors. Kicked out, booted, creative differences, and so many announced projects that have either been canceled or shelved entirely. But we do have some good news on a project we thought was dead.
May the Force.
The Force will be with you. Always.
Welcome to Star Wars Uplink, your place for everything Star Wars gaming, the TV shows, and the movies. Each week we dive deep into two topics from the galaxy far, far away. I'm your host, Sage Goodwin, and as always, I'm joined by Sydney Laurel. How are you doing?
Hey.
In today's episode, we're talking about Rogue Squadron back in action after all, as well as deeper details on Jedi Survivor. So let's jump right in.
Just you reconsider playing that message for him.
Every time we talk about a Star Wars movie, it's like, okay, we're back. No, it's canceled. Oh, we're back. Oh, it's delayed. Oh, it's canceled. Now it's back. So we have another story about this. And this all starts with DC. Yes, DC. James Gunn has taken over DC and is cleaning the slate on everything. Henry Cavill announced that he's back as Superman. Henry Cavill announced that he's no longer Superman. Wonder Woman 3 was in pre-production. Wonder Woman 3 is no longer in pre-production and has been officially canceled, as well as Black Adam 2 and all of these other things. But because of that, we've had a cleaning of the slate, which means Patty Jenkins is back for Rogue Squadron and had this huge write-up online about it, and officially said, yes, it's sad news around Wonder Woman 3, but now it was originally reported that, yes, they were going to work on it. Then Patty Jenkins had to actually step out of the contract, but they went and renegotiated that, yes, we'll still do it, but it's going to be when I get done with Wonder Woman 3. But no longer Wonder Woman 3, so now it is back in pre-production. She said that she had like a lengthy pre-production and preparation period for it. So there was a lot of stuff that they already did. It was just schedules around filming that they were having struggles with. So now they've gone back to it. They're re-looking at it, and they're trying to see what direction they want to go with it. But it is now officially back in pre-production and is probably going to be the closest one to filming, I would assume, depending on how like the Taika Waititi, the Sean Levy, or the Damon Lindelof one. There's a lot announced, but as we've seen before, that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, who knows if this is actually going to be the real thing now. Like
maybe James Gunn's like, hey, we wanted you back for Wonder Woman 0 again.
Right.
Like we're cleaning the slate, but we also really enjoyed what you did with those ones, because I think most people regard Wonder Woman as like the best of the DC universe, especially the DCEU, because the Batman is its completely different thing. Like it's a separate universe and everything, but they have like the whole Ben Affleck Batman and Henry Cavill Superman and Wonder Woman, like all the people come together in this Justice League world. But he's cleaning the slate, like they're nuking the entire universe. It's now just DCU instead of the DC extended universe or whatever. So that's why Patty Jenkins is no longer on the DC stuff. Friend of the podcast we had on last episode, Eckhart Slatter, had a really good video just kind of talking about it, and the big thing that he mentioned was around the directors, because Lucasfilm, they do a good job of selecting good directors. Objectively, Patty Jenkins is a good director from what she did on Wonder Woman. I haven't seen Wonder Woman 84, but that's very mixed, and I would assume most of that's due to the studio stuff. Like if there are many issues, I think a lot of it's due to that. If we look at Rian Johnson, incredible director, but he has, rightfully so, prioritized other projects. They originally announced he was going to do a whole trilogy of Star Wars movies, and that was after The Last Jedi came out. Or before The Last Jedi came out, one of the two. So he has on his slate something that he wants to do in the Star Wars universe, but has prioritized something. I think it's a good decision, but he's prioritized the Knives Out series, where he wants to do like a whole Knives Out universe and have like 7 different movies in the series. Probably the soonest that he'd be able to do anything would probably be like 2030, maybe. Like it'd probably be around that time period, like maybe 6 to 10 years.
Yeah. It's interesting that we're getting these kinds of directors, not because they're bad. It's just that we've never seen so many directors, like just so many different directors in Star Wars, and just not Star Wars people, you know? Like, I don't know. Maybe that's like,
I think that's a really good point.
Silly to say, because like obviously the Star Wars person is George Lucas. Like, that's the guy, you know?
But they aren't choosing like someone who's actively saying, yes, I want to direct a Star Wars project. Except I think Taika Waititi said he wanted to do it before he got onto The Mandalorian. But most of the point, it's like J.J. Abrams was doing the Star Trek stuff, and they're like, hey, J.J., come over here. We'd love for you to do this.
Experience in space.
Yeah. You want to make Star Trek but Star Wars? You want to make a J.J. Abrams movie but Star Wars? Like, they approach all these different directors just because they like them and not the people that like actively want to make a Star Wars movie, which is I think it's an interesting choice. But because of that, all of these directors already have things that they're doing, and it wouldn't be a big budget thing. With the Knives Out stuff, Rian Johnson has free creative control. Like, he can make those movies whatever they want to because the first one was so successful.
True.
And he has a vision for where he wants to go with the future. And like that's his baby. Like, the movies that he's made has been like Looper and a few others where it's just his story that he's been making. Patty Jenkins, I think, is one of the exceptions to that rule, where she did, I think, some smaller indie stuff and then did the Wonder Woman stuff. And that was a big franchise thing. But prioritized the thing that got her into the door in the big budget filming over Star Wars. But they've been consistently saying, yeah, we're going to give you a Star Wars movie, but it's to these people that consistently prioritize everything but Star Wars first, which is why there hasn't been a movie in 3 years.
And I can't blame them. I mean, clearly, especially with something like Star Wars, it's like that is going to be not very freedom. Like you know, like you're not going to have that kind of creative flow and freedom with like your own story, obviously. I can't blame them for not prioritizing Star Wars.
I don't blame any of the directors for making the decision that's better for their career, except for Patty Jenkins. I think she put her eggs all in one basket.
Sure.
With the DC stuff, even though, I mean, it happened so quickly. It went from, we're going to announce all these projects in the DCEU to James Gunn taking over, and within like 6 months, he's nuked everything.
Yeah,
so
that's
like, a lot. When you look at like, okay, Star Wars, yes, it has its problems, but it didn't just nuke its universe after nuking its universe after nuking its universe. Like, they've consistently done something like that. So when you make the decision to put your eggs into the DC basket, obviously that's going to be tumultuous. But I think on the same front, like, if you say, yeah, I'm going to make a Star Wars thing, as we've seen consistently, if you have any creative differences, you probably won't survive that project. Like Miller and Lord, they left and did other things because of they had creative differences. They have you have all of these like consistent stories around these creative differences, and ultimately coming out either not the vision of the creator, when you have something like Obi-Wan Kenobi, or they just need to fill time because Pedro Pascal is so busy, so they make Book of Boba Fett because it's a Mandalorian-like story. So there's all of these different things that they're considering as a studio. But I don't think they're making the right decisions when it comes to choice of director.
So you think that they need to like choose directors that are have a very open schedule? I think
finding indie developer, not indie developers, but finding indie directors that have talent, that have skill, that maybe even have experience with big budgets, whether that be an assistant director, someone who's worked on these teams. But I think the main priority that they need to be looking at is, do they want to make a Star Wars thing more than they want to make anything else? That's good. Because if you look at something like Jon Favreau, he approached Lucasfilm and said, I have an idea around a Star Wars project. They didn't go, as far as I'm aware, and the stories that I've heard is, Lucasfilm didn't say, hey, Jon Favreau, you want to create the new Marvel, like,
right,
the new Mandalorian cinematic universe? No, it was a project where Jon Favreau had an idea. He approached Lucasfilm. Dave Filoni and him got together to collaborate on this idea, and they ended up making The Mandalorian.
So you're saying
same with Tony Gilroy. I think he was like, oh, this would be a fun project, and I think he had an idea for a Star Wars project. That may be wrong. That's just something that I could see happening. The good Star Wars that we've gotten has not been because Lucasfilm made a decision. it's a creative person approached Lucasfilm with an idea.
Right. It's fascinating that Disney as a studio would be going out to get these big name people when they should just be sitting back on their laurels and letting people come to them, you know? It's like, why don't you just choose this best story? Because clearly there's got to be people out there that want to make stories about Star Wars in the Star Wars universe. Why don't you just let them do all the work and come to you? Strange tactic. I understand why they're doing it. It's because they're Disney, and heck you want the name.
That's exactly it. They have that idea of, if we have this director's audience is going to go with them.
Right.
But that didn't happen when you look at something like The Last Jedi. I think more people found out about Rian Johnson from The Last Jedi than people came from his movies to Star Wars. I think the only option when you look at it, like, okay, people that like Tony Gilroy probably went to watch Andor.
Yeah.
I think that's the standout. That's the exception, but does not prove the rule of... It never works, because Star Wars is this big thing. And a lot of directors, I mean, that's why Ron Howard denied George Lucas when George Lucas approached him to direct some of the prequel trilogy. It was not George Lucas's plan to direct the whole trilogy. I think a lot of people, when they look at something like a big budget film, it's not from the perspective of, I'm doing this as a career move. Usually, if they're doing that, it's towards the end of their career. If you look at something like J.J. Abrams, like most of the best things that J.J. Abrams has done has been in the past. I don't think he's got something good going forward. He's peaked as a director, I think, in terms of what we know him as. And if you look at, like, Tony Gilroy has says, like, he does not want to continue doing Star Wars, which is why he said, I have an endpoint and I'm only going to do 2 seasons. Because if I did more than 2 seasons, I would be dead by the time it finished.
Right.
So there's another director who has an idea of where he wants to go, but not necessarily knows that he has very few projects in his future to do like he has in terms of the involvement that he has in Andor. Rian Johnson, he did his story and then kind of left. And I don't think until he gets more towards the end of his career will he go back to his Star Wars trilogy.
Yeah.
Because why would you, if you have the option as a director to do your own thing, why would you go and do someone else's thing where you do not have creative control to make a movie? I think this is a perfect opportunity for Star Wars to go in this very different direction where they can approach these smaller directors and say, hey, I heard you talking about online or in this interview that you love Star Wars and would love to do a Star Wars project. Like, that's your dream project. They can be the creator of these iconic directors instead of bringing in these either directors that are iconic, but they already have their own things, or they're in like the later part of their career. I think they can start creating these directors.
Yeah, it's almost like...
It gives them more control over the directors too, if that's what they want.
It really does. And it's like they're trying to rely on the director's name instead of Star Wars. Disney needs to allow the brand of Star Wars to just let it be. Like, just let that be enough. Like, it doesn't have to be these big, great names. As long as we're getting good Star Wars stories. Yeah. What does it matter?
Because I think Disney and Lucasfilm want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to have these big Star Wars or these big director names create Star Wars projects, but not create the Star Wars projects they want to do. Except somehow Tony Gilroy did it, because I think he's Tony Gilroy. He can do whatever the heck he wants to, and people are going to let him do it because he's so good. But if you look at something like Miller and Lord, where they have an idea for a Star Wars project with Solo, and it goes in the direction that Lucasfilm doesn't want it to go to, I think that's. They want to have these big names and get people in the door for, I want to see what a Miller and Lord Star Wars project looks like. But Lucasfilm finds out very quickly that they don't like what a Miller and Lord Star Wars project looks like.
It's still surprising to me that with something like Star Wars, that the studio would have such rigidity to it, especially now that they've pretty much like booted George Lucas out. So it's like, it could be anything, you know? Like, what kind of law are they sticking to now? Like, what's the point? Like, I don't, Star Wars always seems to run on like a bigger vision. And then,
I mean, that's what George Lucas was. He was the orchestrator of the whole story.
And then they find the passionate people to do it. And it's not, it doesn't matter who it is, as long as it's truly a good story, you know? Like, that's what makes Star Wars.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of Lucasfilm in this modern era is, let's start with the director and then we'll figure out the story later. Mm-hmm. When they should start with the story and then find a director who's passionate about Star Wars and is going to bring their everything to make it be the best Star Wars they could.
Or, like I was saying earlier, let them sit on their laurels and just let the people who have the passion and the story and the drive to come to them.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's what LucasArts did, is they had all these developers come to them with ideas for games, and they said yes or no. Mm-hmm. And we got a crap ton of Star Wars games.
Even if the studio wanted to come in and be like, this is our theme for Star Wars now, everything has to come under this kind of banner.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Mm-hmm. There's still got to be a lot of people out there wanting to do something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just...
Another example of this is Sean Levy, who was one of the directors and producers and writers for Stranger Things. So he's become a much bigger thing with the Duffer Brothers. Like, he's directed a few episodes. He's produced, I think, most of them. So he's got his own career, but he's also got Stranger Things. And he's working on all these projects. They've announced that he's going to bring a Star Wars project, but he's so busy with his other things, we probably won't see it until whenever Rian Johnson's movie comes out, because he's just as busy.
What are they doing?
Yeah. At least they aren't nuking the whole universe and starting over again.
True. But, I mean, arguably DC needed it. So
yeah, DC definitely needed it. This span of no movies has inspired and motivated Lucasfilm to create more movies. And I think hopefully they're starting to realize that we can't just say, hey, big name director, make this. Like, they couldn't go to Martin Scorsese and be like, hey, make a Star Wars thing.
Right.
Because they realize he's going to make his own things. But if you could say Rian Johnson is of the level of like a Martin Scorsese. Don't come at me, film people. This is just an example. But if you look at him, like, Martin Scorsese's going to make his own thing. If you look at Rian Johnson, he's going to make his own thing. Why would you expect Rian Johnson to prioritize Star Wars if you wouldn't expect someone like Martin Scorsese or, like, I don't know, Tim Burton or whatever to not make their own things? Mm-hmm. Find directors that are motivated to make Star Wars. Mm-hmm. Which I think when you think of motivation to make a good Star Wars project, you can definitely look at the video games. Mm-hmm. Of the video games that we've gotten, it's rough. It's rough when you look at it. 2015 Battlefront I loved, but it was lacking a lot of the things that people wanted it to. Battlefront 2 2017 was a rocky launch, to say the least, but ultimately ended up being fantastic and one of the best Star Wars games, period. Star Wars Squadrons, while it was under-prioritized, I still think it was a great game. I just wish it had a little bit more legs underneath it and was given the support it needed. And then you look at Jedi Fallen Order, which was the number one example of like what a Star Wars single-player game could be made in this new decade. And I think they did such a fantastic job with that. Story was great, but it came from a studio that said, we want to make a Star Wars project. Can we make a Star Wars project? And ultimately they said yes. And they wanted to make a Star Wars project on lightsabers and Jedi. And Lucasfilm was like, oh, no, we want you to make a bounty hunter game. And Respawn was like, we're going to make a Jedi game or we won't make a game at all. So you can either give us the license and we'll do it, or we won't do it and we'll focus on Apex more. That's the kind of like, if you're going to go for, that's the kind of motivation you need. You need people that are going to be strong and motivated to make a Star Wars project.
Yeah, and willing to just stick to your guns, stick to your lightsabers, and not be pushed around. And I feel like that's kind of, in a way, I mean, not to go back to like the directors and things, but like getting these big names, they're not gonna want to be pushed around. Yeah. No one wants to be pushed around. Mm-hmm. Everyone has their story, and I don't know, we all need to be free to tell it.
And the benefit is on the video game side of things, there's a lot more freedom because Disney internally does not prioritize gaming as much as they probably should.
Right.
Because of how big gaming is, they just say, oh, hey, make some Star Wars games, EA, and they make 4. And that's it. But now we're getting an opening of the license. And looking forward, we have Jedi Survivor coming up very soon in March, which is going to be super fun. We're really looking forward to it. But we have more details around that.
Ooh.
Cameron Monaghan had some interviews. and he dropped some really good details. But first, how are you feeling about the game? Now we've gotten some time to let it sink in. We've watched the trailer a few more times. We had the discussion with Eckhart's Ladder directly after the reveal. Like, there's been a lot going on, but how are you feeling about the game?
I mean, I'm pretty excited. It looks pretty heavy.
Yes.
I don't feel like we've gotten a whole lot, honestly. Like, we don't have a lot of information.
We have lots of bits and pieces and the feeling towards the game or what the game's going to feel like. They I think they struck gold when they got Cameron Monaghan and they went with the direction of Cal Kestis. Oh. He is such a unique character. I would say he's like the new Luke Skywalker. Like, he's got a very interesting past and history that we see with like Fallen Order. He's got that hope and understanding and want to like grow the idea of what Jedi are. I'm really looking forward to it, honestly.
Yeah.
And just knowing that it's Respawn that's making it. They put the time in, they delayed it internally, and they said, hey, we're going to release this when it's ready. I think it's going to be good. But on that front, we have an interview with Cameron Monaghan, and he says this, quote, Cal's worldview is starting to shift as well. Desperate times are calling for desperate measures, and it becomes very difficult for him to even understand what it is that he is fighting to protect or where he should go. You have the Empire rapidly expanding and very aggressively doing so, and expanding to even the smallest and furthest reaches of this galaxy. And I think that from his perspective, going from planet to planet and seeing just an increasingly desperate situation must be very, very lonely. I can imagine that would definitely weigh on someone. Cal's more mature, more rugged, and he's been weathered by time and by situation.
That much is clear.
Yeah. He's still a pretty young man, but I actually think that he would look a bit older than what he actually is because he's been through a lot. And that was something that I wanted to be reflected in performance as well. That you see he's still a young soul, but also there's a weight beyond his years. And there's a wisdom and self-awareness to him that I think is interesting. But you have to be a little bit of a scoundrel at some times to get by in the world. You have to be a little bit roguish, and you have to know when to fight back and how to do it. IGN asked Monaghan if there was any hope for Cal to get personally get a happy ending to this story. Quote, it depends on what you define as happy ending, right? He replied. If you effect change that is meaningful, and if you are able to accomplish the things you set out to do, I think that is in some way satisfying or meaningful. One of the interesting things that we're doing with the exploration of the Jedi is what it means to be on the light side of the Force, especially when you have situations that are increasingly more desperate and increasingly difficult and don't necessarily have a right answer. So that's a lot of like, oh man, we're going to get a heavy, heavy story here. It's going to be emotional. Like, we're probably gonna cry watching it or playing through it. He's also said that the why we didn't see the Mantis crew is, if I can remember this quote correctly, it's as you go forward, you have like friendships that go in and out, and there's been some struggles in the background around that, and yeah, so apparently there's been some inner turmoil when it comes to the Mantis crew, as we see that Seer is on her own, and we could probably assume Grease and Marin are also heading their own separate paths, because I think this is set 5 years after Jedi Fallen Order.
That's sad.
I'm going to be very interested to see where the story goes, especially in the book. So I think that's going to give us a lot of good information about where the Mantis crew is, what happens. I assume they're going to get into that in the book. According to Amazon and its listing, it's going to come out March 7th.
Okay.
So it's going to be 10 days before the book. We're going to have to...
We're going to have to pound that book in.
Yeah. We're going to have to get it. I'll probably get the audiobook. Yeah. And maybe the... physical version too, so we can put it on the shelf.
There's kind of a lot to unpack here. Now I'm scared for my heart now. Like, oh no.
I definitely am concerned with the is there going to be a happy ending for this story? Because I hope that we get more than just 2 in the Jedi series. Yeah. I hope we get Jedi Fallen Order, Jedi Survivor, and then like one more game at least. So I love this universe that they're building as Respawn. I love that they're getting to explore a single-player game and campaign in Star Wars, having this canon story and bringing in some really like interesting and unique perspectives.
I wonder how real they're gonna get with this game, because it's feeling really real to me right now. Because like we're dealing with friendships dissolving and like the helplessness of the Empire like overtaking everything and like. Whew.
Well, I think you have to in this time period, because this is it's set in the same time period as Obi-Wan is, the show. We see definitely a run down emotionally Obi-Wan there, and it's a really dark time because the Jedi lost,
right?
Period. And what do you look like when you have hope that there is hope, and you want to fight for what you believe is right, and want the future of the Jedi, and to continue fighting this big force that is the Empire.
I find his commitment to the character a little daunting. Like, I don't know.
He loves the character.
Just hearing him talk about, like, I want to give him this, like, weight on his shoulders that makes him, like, wise beyond his years, but to keep that youthfulness still in there. But like, all of this is so, like, yikes. Like, whoa. Like,
yeah.
Thank you. Also, I'm scared now. Like, I don't know. It's just, this whole game is just feeling so real, and it makes me emotionally nervous, because I know when things are super real, like you see what's coming, and you see like they're not gonna pull any punches here. Like,
so what you're saying is you need to emotionally prepare yourself when we stream it on our YouTube channel.
Yeah. I need to have tissues off camera, but really close by. Because, oh man.
Have like a quick, we'll be right back scene.
Hang on.
Okay, now that we're back from bawling our eyes out. Yep.
Yeah, it's gonna be a journey. And there's no talk about a third one yet?
Not so far. I hope there is a third one. I hope that we get to see more Cal, because I think he's such a good character. Cameron obviously enjoys playing him. He's definitely talked about wanting Cal to become go into the live action sphere. So I definitely could see that happening as well. Like, there's a lot that could be there, and I'm hopeful.
Yeah.
That may bite me in the butt.
I would be surprised if they. Don't.
The first game was the best-selling single-player game EA has had, and it sold, I think, like 10 million copies in the first like few months, and it's sold more than that. I think they're nearing like 20 or 30 million or something like that.
Yeah, you would
like
think.
They've sold a lot of this game. I don't think they're going to turn that down.
Yeah, you would think that they'll still make it.
It's EA. If it's popular and it makes money, they're going to continue doing it.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
And I mean, Cameron seems to be like the guy in the spotlight. So it seems like he would have mentioned something like, "This is the end." Maybe, I don't know.
I hope they leave it open.
Yeah.
Darth Sidious, arguably one of the strongest Sith ever to have lived, was at one point in life an ambitious kid with deep desires for art, wisdom, history, and a particular philosophy. This is Palpatine's origin story. On the highly political planet of Naboo, Palpatine grew up in a wealthy family known as the House of Palpatine. The family was considered quite conservative, and their idealism was not liked by many. However, they had grown significantly wealthy from their political position. Palpatine, however, stood out compared to the rest of the family. At an early age, he realized that he had powers that no one else in the family had. These powers were a connection to the Force. Throughout Palpatine's life, he distanced himself from the family and was considered a unique but distasteful addition, especially by his father, who tried to keep him in the education of his political narrative. And although Palpatine was highly politically interested, he had a significantly different political point of view. He also believed the family was a failure. He thought that they could use their political position for something better, grow wealthier throughout the modern galaxy, and more importantly, become more powerful. With his ties to the Force and his obsession with power, Palpatine found an increasing interest in the ancient Sith philosophy and its history. With his family's money, he secretly acquired old artifacts of the Sith, which he would study and record. Through his many discoveries, he realized the path of the dark side was the natural direction for him to follow to gain absolute power, something that he had always strived for. He then crafted his own set of morals and ethics that he would live by, dismissing the norms of morality. Eventually, during his studies at Theed University on Naboo, he caught the attention of Ego the Mask, secretly known as Darth Plagueis. The Mask recognized the significant power and potential within Palpatine and decided that he was going to test him to see if he was worthy. After growing a secret, professional relationship with Palpatine, who at the time grew increasingly fond of the Sith, the Mask had the young boy fully embrace the dark side by removing those closest to him, just like the ancient Sith would often do to earn their right to power. Palpatine murdered his family and eventually sought counsel with Ego the Mask, who later revealed his true nature as a Sith Lord. With this new revelation, it didn't take long before Palpatine bent his knee and offered his service and loyalty to Plagueis. Palpatine, within the Order of the Sith, was then recognized as the infamous Sidious and the apprentice of Darth Plagueis the Wise.
With that, let us know your thoughts. What are we going to see with Cal Kestis next? Where do you want the story to go? And what are your thoughts around the directors of Star Wars? And who do you want to see directing a Star Wars movie that could actually direct a Star Wars movie? Let us know in the comments below if you're watching this on YouTube, or contact at uplinkpodcast.com, or at Star Wars Uplink, wherever you find podcasts online. YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Hive Social, all the places. You can check us out there. As always, you can listen to this podcast wherever you find podcasts. And, as always, thank you for listening, and may the Force be with you.